an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Magician's Apprentice, chapters 48, 49, 50, and epilogue, and kind of technically also chapter 47. In these chapters, we get to see exactly what agreement was reached between Sachaka and Kirelia, and it is a lot more complicated than I expected, and I feel like in retrospect, I like this book more than I liked it while I read it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. First of all, huge thanks to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. I really appreciate buying an entire book's worth. And I think Ashleigh has bought 4 total books and 2 seasons of a TV show. So yeah, MVP. Martin's saying in the chat, I told you it would get better. Hi, Martin and Melanie. It's not even, Martin, necessarily that it would get better. Like, I think it's that I didn't really get what she was doing right away, and I didn't trust her as an author yet because she was getting into some subject matter that she hadn't really delved into in the original trilogy. So I, as a reader, didn't really trust her yet. And now I kind of see what she was doing, and I wish that I had been more secure while reading it, in the knowledge that she kind of was aware of what she was playing with. And when I say aware of what she was playing with, I'm not really even talking because, you know, I still find the racial aspects of what was done with Sachaka a little bit troubling. But in terms of what she did with Hanara and Hanara's being like brainwashed, that's actually like pretty interesting. And I don't know how like true a representation of a slave's mindset it really is, because I don't have a ton of experience with talking to people who have gone through anything like this. But I will say that I do know about people who have been abused and the way their minds work. So on a parallel with that, it feels pretty comparable. And I think the fact that she's sort of unflinching until the very end with Hanara and Narvellan, I think that's kind of impressive. You know, it's almost brave, because it'd be really easy to write Hanara as somebody who suddenly realized that his master was trash, who all of a sudden had an epiphany and saw spread before him his mistakes and his, you know, his misjudgments of things. But instead, she just kind of has, like, the whole thing with Hanara be genuine grief. Like, he's genuinely upset about Toccato. And then being smart enough to realize that Narvellan's really the best he's going to do now. And it's kind of tragic, you know? But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So I said technically also chapter 47 because I kind of hadn't gotten a real chance to cover everything that went down with Tessia and her learning how to do better healing magic, and also what went on with Stara. Now, the thing with Stara and the traitors, like, this is I feel like I don't think that this was entirely earned. It's kind of a weird thing where I feel like Stara is the turn towards being like, oh, I want to rebuild a whole new society without men. It seems kind of abrupt to me. I couldn't really pinpoint the moment where she sort of went from deciding that she was going to help all of these women get out of the way of the Kirelians to, oh, we're going to resettle completely. And she has to bring like some bad news to Well, Vora, actually. She's talking about 1/3 of the defenders fell when they started attacking Kiralians from hidden positions. She watches the whole thing. And there's this interesting moment. Stara felt a chill run down her spine, then another. The women were already in danger of being discovered and recognized by those people in the city they'd fled from in the first place. Now there was the possible threat of the invaders taking their revenge upon the people of Arvis. Without magicians to enforce laws, there was the danger of attack from lawless freemen taking advantage of chaos, who would rape and rob them and later claim it was Kiralians. And slaves might stop working once there were no masters to order them about, and with nobody raising or delivering foodstuff, Arvis would eventually starve. We are probably safe here, so long as Kachiro returns. But what will the Kiralians do to the magicians who survive the battle? Even if they let him live, I doubt he could protect us from them. Should they leave? I should be able to fend off lawless freemen with magic, but where should we go? So this whole line of thinking to me was just an escape plan that was meant to be temporary. And there might be a line that I sort of like breezed over as I was reading where her brain sort of switches from, oh, we're just getting out of the path of this destruction to, we are going to create a brand new society. But I was taken by surprise when I heard her thinking about it later. 'Cause that's how like one of the chapters ends. It's just like, we're going to, because she says, we're going to leave and make our own sanctuary. And it says that, like, we're going to leave and make our own sanctuary. But sanctuary, again, I associate that word with it being like a place that you go to escape from things temporarily. So I don't know. If you guys like remember the specific line where she's like, oh, we're going to stay and we're going to start everything brand new. I even if Stara thought that to herself, I didn't feel like I saw in the conversation she was having with these women that they were agreeing with this either. I got the impression everybody thought that this was a temporary thing. But then, like, in the last chapter, it's sort of a given, like, they're all talking about how they're going to have to build homes and they're going to have to change the soil to grow things. And I was like, oh, okay, so everybody is on board with this, but I feel like that's an enormous choice to make. And they never really have the big talk of, hey, I think we should all leave behind everybody male that we know of and all of our families as well who aren't coming with us and start a new life in a strange place we've never been together with no real idea of what we're doing, where we're going. Well, she has an idea of where we're going because of the maps, but it's not like she's been there. She has to trust that the information on this map is correct. And I really, if you're looking back, I would think that this would be a much bigger decision. And I would remember the in-depth conversation between these women where they decide that this is what they're going to do. And Kachiro takes the way that she says, we're getting out of Arvis for a while. He takes that as what I did, which is just, this is a temporary thing. She wants to, she kind of like, she doesn't want him to come with them, but she says something like, what about you? You're not coming with us? And that, again, to me made it feel like, well, this isn't a plan to just be without dudes then, right? Because she's like sort of leaving the door open for him if he were going to come. Like, I don't know if she's just so sure that he would turn her down, but let's see. Once outside, she breathed a deep sigh of relief. And this is when they come across Jayan and Tessia, and Jayan gets really, really badly injured. And let's see, perhaps they had no power left. She's talking, oh, right. Feeling tired in her heart, But pushing doubt aside, she started down the road. As she left the city of her birth, she did not look back. Instead, she lifted the map tube so it rested over one shoulder and set her mind on her dream of a sanctuary for women where all were equal and free, and the women she had befriended and championed here followed. Am I wrong, guys? Did I miss the moment where they have this talk and that's what these women are agreeing to? Like, I don't know. I am not somebody who tends to miss much when I'm reading. And I'm not saying it never happens, because it certainly does, but that's a big thing to feel like I just didn't see going on. So, okay. The whole thing with Tessia, she is feeling like a little bit, like she doesn't really, because they're killing all of these slaves and everything and pulling all of this power, they're not getting into real fights. They are just conquering. And so she doesn't have as much to do as a healer because there's not this sort of, the regular battle of magician against magician that had been going on before. I want to say, too, that the magician against magician battle isn't even going to result in the kinds of injuries that Tessia would deal with, because it's flashes of light between folks. This is the one thing that, looking back on the book, I stand by, which is that this author doesn't know how to write battles. This author is really interested in the story surrounding war and battles and big shifts in society. But in terms of the action of a battle, this author isn't great at it. And it's been, 4 books now, and I feel pretty confident saying that. I don't feel like she knows how to build the kind of tension that makes me actually worried that something is going to happen to someone. And when a magician battle is just the two of them standing in a line across from each other with the air beginning to pulse and shimmer and flash between them, and that's it? Come on. Your magic is boring. I mean, the magic in this series is kind of incidental in a lot of ways. And sometimes I kind of like that, But when we are building up to these big confrontations, that I feel like you've either got to really make it impressive to justify this incredible, apex of everybody coming together, or you have to do something really ballsy, like George R.R. Martin completely skipping battles because somebody got knocked out and then he wakes up and the battle's over. And I know a lot of people felt really irritated by that I don't remember which of the books it is, but one of the Song of Ice and Fire books. But I kind of understand why, as an author, if there's not going to be a crucial, event happening within the battle, that you wouldn't feel the need, and it would be really frustrating to write an entire chapter, at least, about it, when it really doesn't feel actually necessary to the plot, other than what was the result of the battle. And one could argue that, what happens with Hanara watching Takato kill all of these slaves, that is important because it's underlining just how deep his loyalty and brainwashing must be when he saw his master killing several slaves right before he was about to maybe kill him, and he's still by his side anyway. But I feel like that's something that could be told in a flashback after Hanara is after the battle is over, and we don't really need to see things from Tessia's perspective out way on the sidelines when she's not even fighting, and that I really thought once we got to Sachaka and the magicians face off against one another again, I thought this was I thought that she was saving up her juice so that she could blow it all on this scene. And not really at all, actually. So it was just kind of, I just kept waiting for a thing that never happened. If anything, I felt like the scene with Narvellan and Hanara with the Source Stone at the end was written in a more compelling way. And I like knew what was happening there. I'm sure that most readers had figured it out. So it wasn't even compelling because I was like, ooh, what's going to happen next? It was just like, oh, the dread, you know, kind of having an idea of what's coming. Narvellan being such a weirdo. And I would have liked as well for Narvellan's being a bit unstable to have been led into a bit better. And maybe if I reread this, I would see that there was some foreshadowing there and some groundwork being laid that I just didn't really like clue into the first time around. But it did sort of feel like Narvellan was played as some guy who was like essentially a nice dude. And then he goes off with Jayan on that one mission, kills 100 slaves and comes back like a fucking maniac. But anyway, okay. So this moment with the guys who had been poisoned that Tessia takes care of. I really liked this because it's a combination of things going on. First of all, there's the theory here that the people of Sachaka, maybe the slaves, poisoned the food supply before leaving. And like, this is something that I think they should have been a little warier about, because when you find a food store that's chock full, even though there's not anybody left in town, that's a red flag. But they just kind of try and take it as like a stroke of good fortune, which I do understand. When you're struggling to find food, there comes a point where you're just like, I just can't keep questioning stuff. I have to eat. And Tessia, she gets called in because these guys are on the edge of death and they just don't really know what else to do. And there's a question, I mentioned this before about Dakin, who had been, Narvellan was like, some people are saying you poisoned them, but I talked about that. I won't really get into that again. But Tessia, what she does, it's interesting. She can push her mind into the body of the men who are like, it's like almost like mind reading, except that rather than demanding a specific memory, she wants their body to talk to her and tell her what's going on. So she can sense the poison in their bloodstreams, and she can sense that they are both going to die pretty quickly. And she gives up for a minute. She's just like, I can't do this. And the king is here and is like, I think you can. If you can't, then they're going to die anyway. No harm done, but you may as well try. And she goes in on the one guy and tries something a little different and begins to sort of attempt to gather the poison out of his bloodstream and collect it into one mass that she then essentially has him shit out. And as she's doing that, she can feel him using, like, it's like an unconscious thing, because apparently magicians heal faster in general because their magic helps with the healing process. So it's like the magician can feel her in his system, and he employs her magic in assistance with his own to heal himself. And this like double power manages to get him to a place where he is stable and not going to die immediately. Unfortunately, it takes her long enough to do this that by the time she turns around to deal with the second guy, he's dead. He's already like blue. So that was a bummer. I felt bad that she couldn't help both of them, but this is a huge, like, a enormous development in terms of magical education. And it's fun to see Tessia be the one that like comes up with that and puts this all together. Chapter 48. Hanara had his mind read by the king, and he's being brought somewhere else. And I was like not really sure where this was, because the movement through, it says, shoved through increasingly wider and more opulently decorated corridors. I thought that was already what had happened when he went to see the king in his chambers. It turns out he's being led to the throne room. A large crowd of slaves hovered round one particular door. Hanara felt his stomach flip over as he realized the guard was taking him towards them. The slaves were frowning, some wringing their hands, and he could hear a frantic, rapid chatter. And a bunch of them, plus some of the ordinary folks, take a look at him, and they are just like, dude, you are trash. Essentially, Hanara is 100% guilty by association. I feel for this guy. Like, it's not fair, but that's the way shit goes, you know? That this is, if Takato had been married, was he married? I can't remember how that went, but if he had been, like, I'm sure that his wife would be treated the same way. So he gets brought into the throne room, and he sees Takato laying naked on his back, covered in cuts and bruises. And this dude is just barely conscious. You know, he is in a bad way. So he turns around and he sees all of these Kiralians enter, and he is just like, oh my God, they managed to get through. And here comes a paragraph that was a little heavy-handed, but I still kind of found it amusing. They got through the city and into the imperial palace. After all that Takato did to them, they fought back and then kept coming all the way to Arvis. He couldn't help admiring them for that. The barbarian race of Kiralia had come a long way. And, you know, the irony, I suppose, of a group of people who have enslaved the majority of their people and their women, calling other people barbarians, is funny. So I did kind of like that. And at this point, Hanara is starting to, like, recognize people. He sees Lord Dakin, and Lord Dakin has this, like, appalled expression when he sets eyes on Takato. And the king is, like, kind of unimpressed with the fact that the emperor is presenting Takato to him this way. And he's like, so what is it that you want in return for this? And the emperor says, the lives of my people, at least those whom you haven't yet taken, for the lives of my family, for my own life too, perhaps. And Takato at this point says, who's the traitor now, coward? Why should I let you live? The king asked. You know I did not initiate the invasion of your country. If your spies did their job well, you should also know that I tried to stop it. But you did endorse it eventually. Yes, it was a necessary deception. The army I sent was meant to split in three, two parts held in reserve to overcome this Ichani rebel when he was at his weakest. It looked to me as if your intention was to take over at that point and claim victory for yourself, the king said. From Takato came a weak cry of triumph. See, he rasped, even the barbarian king sees through you. Yet you didn't, the emperor reminded him. He looked at the king. Would you prefer I kill him or that you do it yourself? As no doubt you will have your magicians do now. And the king holds out a knife and he says, whoever takes the blade may make the kill. And Narvelin begins to step forward. But instead, Dakin is the one who takes it. And this is a very Ned Stark sort of moment. You know, he who makes what does he say? Makes the judgment or the verdict or whatever, must swing the blade. And he is not happy to do this, but he says something about how maybe, Unlike you, I don't relish killing. I asked myself many times why I joined this invasion of Sachaka, why I said nothing against the unnecessary slaughter. Now I see it was to get to the necessary slaughter, and I find I'm not squeamish at all. And Takato says, I only did it to help our people. Don't we all? Dakin replied, and his arm jerked downwards. So this is one of those moments where I'm not really sure about how I feel. I like Dakin doing the murder because I think that he needs to be involved somehow in all this. There is no way out at this point. He hasn't stopped the slaughter. He hasn't done anything to really stand up to these guys. So not participating at all. At this point, I would just consider him much more of a coward than I would making some sort of moral stand. At the same time, saying I thought that slaughter was unnecessary, but it was necessary to get to this one. That feels like such a rationalization. That just doesn't feel true at all. And, I don't know. Maybe it's true, but I don't know. It's just a little bit too simplistic to really sit right with me. And, Chikato is saying, I only did it to help our people. And I'm like, you didn't, though. That's patently untrue. You did it because you're power hungry and greedy. Helping our people implies that they were somehow being oppressed or something, and that you were like, no, that wasn't what happened. So also, Takato's final words, maybe it's just in character, but because Dakin says, don't we all, in response, I want that to mean more coming from him. And when he's saying that in response to Takato's lie, maybe that's the point, that he's just like, oh yeah, everybody tells themselves that, that kind of thing. But yeah, Hanara is watching this, and he is very shaken by watching Takato be taken out. And the king says, before this war, I doubt my people would have accepted a king with no magic. But now I have proved that a king can still lead, still defeat an enemy, still conquer an empire despite having no magic of his own. The ordinary people of Kyrelia have themselves contributed to the defense of their country. After that, I doubt any will dare to suggest their king is not fit to rule. Which is an interesting thing, because the fact that the king doesn't have his own magic hasn't really come up. I would have really liked it if they talked about that a little bit more. Martin is saying, it's not a huge point, but did you ever realize that the king isn't a magician? Yeah, I knew he wasn't. They talk about that, I think, at the very start of the book. And I don't think that does the king in the trilogy, does he have magic? I feel like he doesn't, right? No, okay. But yeah, I would have really enjoyed a little bit more insight and watching a bit more of the struggle that the king is having with worrying his power is slipping, or that he's not taken seriously because he doesn't have magic. And instead we just hear about this after the fact. And there are a number of ways that it could have been done. We could have had another POV section from his point of view, or we could have had a POV section from one of his advisors, or we could have had a conversation that Dakin participates in or overhears. Anything to sort of give me the impression that this was even a concern of his, but that's not even talked about until it's all over. And even if it wasn't the king talking about it, what if Dakin overheard other magicians being like, well, it's not like he's a magician, so I don't really know if we want to keep this guy around. Just letting us know that there's whisperings going on amongst the other magicians. This just came as a big surprise, kind of out of nowhere. But whatever. So someone, let's see, I surrender myself and Sachaka to you. Narvellan at this point says we can't trust him. He most likely has the power he claims he holds. While he does, he is dangerous. The king spread his hands. He has surrendered. Must I force him to give us his magic as well as his power? It is too much to ask. Yes, the Eileen replied, but there is another way. Have him transfer his power into the Store Stone. Not directly, of course. Someone should take it from him and then transfer it. So they do this transfer, and it doesn't look like anything. Hanara's watching it, and it's just like, I don't know what that was, but okay. Again, in some ways, I will respect that, like, you're making magic sort of incidental and low-key, but when there's a literal emperor having his magic taken from him and stored in a stone that later will destroy half the countryside, I want that to be more to watch. It doesn't have to be a fucking nuclear blast. There doesn't need to be a bunch of lights. It doesn't, just anything. A sense of something in the air, at least. But it's weird to me that this author keeps on having it be very nearly nothing, you know? I just don't really understand that choice. Why talk about Hanara watching it at all if it's not going to be anything, other than to emphasize the fact that nobody can tell anything even happened, which why? Why do you care that we know that? You know, it just doesn't, like, it's a strange choice that I don't really understand the purpose of. So at this point, Narvellan decides that he is going to take Hanara as his slave. And, you know, he's calling him servant, but it really is the same thing. He smiled, but there was no friendliness in it. Hanara looked down, avoiding the man's eyes, which looked a little crazed. Again, with the, like, fact that people are saying now that Narvellan is crazy, when Giant says, I think maybe Narvellan's a little mad, again, sort of came out of nowhere. And this is a bit of a theme with this book. She's, like, taking a long time with stuff that I don't feel really needs it. And then things that are sort of important at the end get glossed over in a way that Giant just makes this observation after the thing with Narvellan killing all of these slaves. And we can say, okay, he killed a bunch of slaves and now he's, like, talking and laughing with the king. We can infer that maybe this guy ain't right. But again, there's no lead up to that. And Giant just says it without actually giving any sort of, like, the way he behaved while we were dealing with the slaves made me start to realize that maybe something isn't, you know, like, more than just how this guy is acting this instant right now. There needs to be more evidence before you just start to be like, yeah, I think he's insane. So now all of a sudden we're having somebody who can tell just looking into the man's eyes that he's not right. But when our crew met Narvellan at the beginning of this journey, they didn't sense anything. There was no indication of that to me that I remember. So I just don't really understand all of the stuff that she's, like, dropping in these last few chapters that are like kind of important that she sort of didn't do as much with as I think she should if it was going to wind up being as important as it is, because Narvellan being crazy is what leads to the destruction of this huge swath of land and the crippling of Sachaka. I mean, that's gigantic. So this being like a bit of a sudden turn is a weird choice to me. So Hanara goes off with Narvellan, and he, like, runs into Tessia at one point because she comes to the palace, and she kind of tells him, like, he doesn't have to work for Narvellan because she can see that Narvellan's nuts. And basically Hanara's like, look, I was the slave of the guy who betrayed the entire country. Nobody is going to want to take me as a slave. It's going to look bad on them, and the other slaves will also look down on me. Narvellan's the only choice I've got, really. Like, if I don't stick with him, I'm probably going to be killed by somebody. So this is what I've got. Which is so sad. I really, really felt bad for Hanara on this one. So we go to Tessia, speaking of, and she and Jayan are like, on the outskirts of town after having been blasted out of the way by Stara, who was escaping with these women. And Jayan, I had mentioned last time, he had landed on a lamp hook that was sticking out. And by the time Tessia wakes up, he's been bleeding for a minute and is not doing well. He's practically unconscious. She manages to get him back to talk to him a little bit. But she begins to use her magic to try and heal him again in a new way that she hadn't done before. She's using a similar method to how she had with the poison, but it's not the same because this is a physical injury rather than something within the bloodstream. Although there are things within the bloodstream due to one of his, I think his intestine is punctured. So he's going septic and she has to start to pull some of the bacteria and the, basically poisons out of his bloodstream and seal up the holes inside of him as well. And as she starts to do that, she can feel his body helping, his magic helping, and really zeroes in on the fact that she doesn't need to lead the charge. After she sealed up injuries and felt out where there are holes and breaks, she can sort of sit back and just let Jayan take control of her magic and his body will do what needs doing. And she doesn't need to completely suss it all out, which I thought was kind of cool. So while she's tuned into his body, she gets, she starts to feel Jayan responding in words, verbally responding in her head, like they're having a conversation. And all of a sudden, he starts to say something about how, cause she's joking about, well, we might die, whatever. He says, don't talk about dying. You have to survive this war. I've waited too long and it's almost over. What are you talking about? But she knew even as she asked. She felt it leaking through the cracks of his self-control. Even as she recognized it and felt astonishment, she felt her own body respond in a way that no healer had ever been able to explain in a satisfactory manner. One of the mysteries, one of the more delightful mysteries, her father would once have said. What was the heart for but to pump blood? Why then did it do this other inexplicable thing? So yeah, they love each other, and while they're connected this way, they reveal that to one another. And I thought that was a neat idea, that they're in each other's heads, and that's when they can sense it coming from each other. So she pulls her consciousness out of his, and he immediately kisses her because, spoiler, he's basically healed. He's doing a lot better already. And he has the energy for this. So they have to both rest. Obviously, he's recovering from this injury. And while he is a lot better, he's not 100%. And Tessia, in letting him use her magic, she is very exhausted because he managed to take a ton of her energy away and she has to fall asleep and let herself recharge. And they fall asleep and are woken up by hoofbeats. And, when they go outside, Lord Bolvin and Lord Terrican are here. And they get led back to everybody. They're, the two lords are just oh man, Dakin is going to be really glad that you guys are still alive because he came back trying to find you and he could not figure out where you were. And as they come upon the group, they are all arguing in one of the manor houses about what to do. And Jayan overhears Narvellan say, we can't abolish slavery entirely. We must do it in stages. Start with personal servants. Leave the slaves that produce food and do the least pleasant work to last, or else Sachaka will starve while drowning in its own refuse. Narvellan, Jayan thought, a familiar chill running down his spine. Why doesn't it surprise me that he wants to keep slavery going? Yet he couldn't help agreeing with the magician. Freeing all slaves at once would cause chaos. So, yeah, it is one of those things how much of this is Narvellan just having good economic sense And how much of this is him just really not caring what happens to these people? You know, especially just being like, well, you know, the personal servants and stuff, free them. But the people who do like grunt work, fuck them. It's just a really unfortunate sort of stance that I feel like has, you know, been carried out until this day. We must keep the populace weak, but not so weak that we are weakened along with them. Freeing the personal slaves means that the remaining magicians will have to pay the people who serve them. Which, that's an interesting idea, that doing that will sort of hobble them. And they won't be able to have the freedom because they're going to have taken on this other huge expense. And this is when Jayan hears that Dakin is going to be staying and helping rule Sachaka along with Narvelin. And we find out later that there are others as well. But at first I thought it was just them two. And I was like, that's kind of an odd choice, but okay. And Jayan starts to get concerned because if Dakin is staying, that means that Tessia is staying. And Jayan has been thinking about the idea of this like guild and really, really wants to go home. So if Tessia stays, he isn't really sure what he's going to do. And what they wind up working out is that Tessia is going to be, she's going to be removed from Lord Dakin's, tutelage, I guess, and she will be Lady Avaria's apprentice now, which is cool. I like that this sort of is in theme with Stara and her ladies going off into the mountains. This is Tessia getting tutored by a woman, and both of them being magicians, and they're about to like really shake things up. So that's kind of a neat parallel there going on, you know. And Jayan says, you know, that he's going to go back and begin to form this guild. And there is this moment where Jayan and Tessia realize who Hanara is when they see him like talking to Jayan or like pulling at his sleeve at one point. Hanara just tells Tessia not to worry about him and to go off and have kids and live a long life and be happy. And she and Jayan are talking about the guild and the future of it. And they decide that it would be smart to have her teach the healing magic from within this guild as a sort of motivation for magicians to join up. That there's going to be this very new method of using magic that they won't be able to be taught by anybody else. And I think that's cool. I like that a lot, that they're going to have something that's really proprietary, because I was sort of thinking, if there's not a guild already, a lot of that has been because these magicians don't trust each other. And while the king says something about how we all used to be very suspicious of one another and now this war has brought us together, that may be true, but that doesn't necessarily remain after the fact. So I kind of wasn't sure how it was going to be explained that all these magicians voluntarily sign up for this thing, and there being really, really new magic. That is a very good explanation to me. So then we go to chapter 50 with Stara and her ladies, and they're coming across, they're looking for this sanctuary area. And this was unexpected, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems as if what is suggested here is that Stara and her ladies come across the spot where they have like learned, the spot where they make store stones. Because it's like once the last store stone is made or destroyed, I don't remember who it is. It might have been Jayan, who's like, oh, and there went the knowledge, or at least a clue on how to make more of them. Now, how to make them has passed into, you know, the mists of time, basically. And based on what's going on with the carvings and all of this, it feels to me that's what's happening here. It's funny that the Eleens had a store stone, but they didn't know how to make another one. Like, I don't know how you reverse engineer magical objects, so I'm not like mad at them about it. But this area, is this where, I can't remember his name, but the magician that was gay in the last series, he goes into a cave where he's almost killed by, like, it's like a machine that I guess is meant to take away a magician's magic so that he can be executed. Is this the same place? Martin says, no, it's not. Okay. Because I figured it was the place where they could make store stones, but I wasn't sure if those two things were related to each other. Because it could be, you know, we take your magic away to execute you, and that magic that we took gets put into this rock. By the way, 2 for the price of 1. But then I was like, I don't know if that really makes sense. So Martin says, Chamber of Punishment is in Eileen, I think. Okay. Or I always wonder if it's Eileen, but I can't call it Eileen because that's a lady's name. So Stara and her ladies are scouting ahead because they have to go up some pretty rough terrain in order to find this place. And they're not even sure it's going to be worthwhile. So rather than make everybody come and suffer through this fucking hike, there are just 5 of them that go on ahead. And it starts to get to the point where everybody's sort of worried that they're not actually reading this map right, or that maybe like since this was written, things have changed, but they're not coming across any place that's remotely habitable. And then finally, they see that there is a cave. They hear water running. So let's see. She crawled through the opening, sending a globe light ahead of her. The roof was low for several strides, then it and the floor curved away. She slid forward, then pushed herself up into a crouch. Her light failed to penetrate far in 2 directions, and from the way the sound of her movements echoed, she guessed she was in a tunnel. It was like being inside a long, squashed tube, wider than it was high, on an angle that matched the crease in the rock walls. Along the bottom, water rushed. So they go up this little stream, and finally they see light ahead, and they come out of this tunnel, and they're in like this little hidden valley, that is filled with grass and plants and trees and all of this. It is lush. And while it is not a place that they can just set up immediately and be like, producing food, it's clear that this place has what it needs to be cultivated and made into a livable area. And they are all very like buoyed by this discovery. They feel really good about it. And there's this interesting moment where Stara starts thinking to herself about what they're going to do about having children. Because she's like, I know a lot of these women want to have children. I would like to have children. We want to keep this community going. We want to continue to, have a population here. But I don't want to let any men in. So I don't know how we do that. How do we get pregnant without men? And then she's like, well, maybe we can like go and copulate in the towns and stuff and then not bring them back. We come back here to our secret area without them. To which I'm like, that's a lovely idea. I do not know how that is enforceable. That seems like the kind of thing that it is inevitable one day there will be a woman who has fallen in love with a guy and she thinks that he should be the exception and shows him where her friends are. And that leads to wreck and ruin. Or one day one of them hooks up with a dude who turns out to be like kind of crazy and he fucking follows her back and takes out his revenge. or whatever. Like, this is just how my mind works. So to me, that's not the best idea, but I don't have a good idea. You know, I don't have an alternative to offer. So I kind of was just like, well, I guess that's the best you can do. And then she's like, well, what about male children? There was no way any woman was going to agree to send her child away. She shook her head. Perhaps it didn't matter so much that the sanctuary was free of men, only that women controlled it. Which I feel you, sister. And this is an interesting thing that kind of there was an experiment. It wasn't even an experiment. I think this was an accident, but there was a group of, I believe, gorillas that were being observed by some biologists. And there were a bunch of males in the group who were really bullies and very abusive and were constantly railing on everybody and raping the females and whatnot. And there was a moment where there was a big confrontation, and a couple of the females killed almost every male except for the babies, and continued to live. They were fine. Killing the males didn't seem to have any effect on the health of the overall group. But as the baby males were socialized, they were not socialized to be aggressive the way that the ones who had died were apparently socialized. And so it became a much more balanced group, and they got on healthily and they were fine. I wish that I could give you a source for that, because it was something that I read in an article, but I think this sounds really similar. It's basically Stara is all right, we need to be the ones in control of educating the boys, because we don't want them to come out acting like these kids that we just ran away from. That's the thing. That sort of stuff, that sort of thinking is not innate. It's socialized behavior. It's taught. So yeah, if you're going to be raising them from birth, you can make sure that they know that shit ain't going to stand. And that's fine. And if you do that, eventually you don't have to worry about sending women down into town to meet guys anymore, because these women aren't all sisters or anything like that. It's going to be, they probably have to start off their family trees with dudes from town. But once you get that going a couple generations, then you've got a community full of different people who are not related to one another, and then who can get into relationships with each other, and that's fine. And those boys would be socialized much better than the ones that they found in town. So if she can keep it up for, I don't know, say 40 years, that's a couple generations out, we're good. We might be able to do this. Now, I know that there is a community of people that, again, the gentleman who was gay from the last trilogy, whose name I can't remember, he, while exploring, trying to find information about Acheron, he runs into this different community that's not Sachaka, not Eileen. I can't remember who they are. But they're out in the mountains, and it's a much smaller tribe. I don't know if this is that group of people, these women are the foundation of that society, or if that's a different unrelated thing and these women are still totally secret, because that would be pretty cool. I would love it if it's sort of meant to be that in the trilogy, a couple of 100 years out, we've got the women, we can believe that they are out there living somewhere totally secret and that they're all fine. So, okay, that's what's going on with these ladies. And they also find this weird sort of doorway that can only be opened by magic. First, there's a dais that has an outline of a human shape, and there are lines radiating out from the chest area, which I believe is meant to be, this is the power coming out of you, because this is the source stone. But they go into the series of caves, and there are a lot of gems, which is something, let's see, Martin says, it's a different group, but you have met a traitor. Can you guess who? No, Martin, I can't. Is it one of the servants at the Magician's Guild? None of them were Sachakan, though, were they? I think Acheron had like the only Sachakan slave. I don't know. No, I don't remember who. But yeah, they find a bunch of gems, so this is going to be something that they can use to trade. That's pretty cool. And they continue to look through, and there's like just a series of caves that sort of strangely, it's almost like, are these meant to be prisons or storage rooms? I don't know. But there's lots of things carved as well. And so this is like a separate area, as if there's like a temple, and they see a man who's dressed in blue. It says, dressed in white. Sorry. He tended to the gemstones as they grew before they were cut, and they were given to him afterwards. He also gave them out to others. In all depictions, he wore a single blue stone on a chain around his neck, radiating lines. On another wall, a man tied with ropes was presented to this white-dressed man. He was bound to a rectangle marked the same way as the slab in the big cave. The white-dressed man then held the blue stone against his chest. In the next scene, the victim was dragged away, clearly dead, and the white man radiated power. And there's like writing underneath that nobody can understand. So this is really fascinating because it's almost like this dude is being treated as if he's like the one caring for the crystals, but he also has all this power. So I'm wondering if like taking this power, does that feed all of the rest of the crystals, or does this dude get all of that power for himself? I don't know. Martin says, guess you'll have to read the next trilogy and find out. Okay. Noted. So she thinks to herself about like what they should call themselves. She goes with the traitors. And she is feeling really good about the direction that all of this is heading. But then we get the epilogue, and this is fun. I like this. Hanara is with Narvellan, and he has no idea why they're coming out here. We find out, guys, in the most offhand way possible, that fucking Lord Dakin was assassinated. Which, like, oh, okay. Guys, I cannot emphasize enough how frustrating I find it. The things that this author chooses to just gloss over and drop like this. There are times where just dropping something really casually works super well. And the shock value of finding it out that way makes it all the more effective. This is not one of those times. This is why did I just read all of this and get to know Lord Dakin, only to not get to see his fate myself? Why? Why would you do it this way? We hear all of this like all at once later. Only Lord Bolvin, who had taken up the role most recently, had ever managed to successfully stand up to the crazy emperor. So then we hear about how Narvellan had tried to take the children away from Sachakan magicians and have them raised in Kyrelia. And a lot of people were just like, dude, you can't just be stealing people's kids, man. No, that's not what we're doing. And he gets so pissy about the fact that this isn't being supported that he retreats to his rooms and refuses to come to any of the meetings. And this gives the king the perfect excuse to force him into retirement. And Narvellan is talking about how he shouldn't have done that he gave them the perfect ammunition, and otherwise they would have not had a valid reason to remove him, and he could still be making a difference. Because as far as he is concerned, Sachaka is just biding its time, and the only defense that Kyrelia has is making sure that Sachaka is too crippled to come back at them. And I mean, it makes sense what he's saying, but also it's deeply racist and definitely fosters a huge resentment between Sachakans and Karelians, which we get to see the results of that later. So Narvellan is sitting he talks about working for 10 years, everything I've done. I didn't get any thanks, yada, yada, yada. And then he pulls out the Store Stone, and Hanara's like, what? Because that is not supposed to be. Narvellan ain't supposed to have that. Like, so clearly he stole it. And it's so funny. Narvellan looked up at Hanara, and a look of realization crossed his face. Oh, I'm sorry, Hanara. I hadn't thought what to do about you. Guess we're in this together. And then he just smashes it, and Hanara dies. Well, okay. They both die, I mean, but I thought that was a pretty solid end for Hanara. That feels right. And then we jump ahead in time again to Jayan, who is out here with Prinnan, who I think is a princess, if I'm not mistaken, right? But he is traveling with her, and Tessia is pregnant, and he is very, very anxious about Tessia's pregnancy. But he is apparently heading out towards Sachaka to help them. There had been so much work to do first, yada, 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 because there's so much. She's pregnant now after 10 years. Like, they've taken a long time before deciding to have a child. And he comes across the wasteland and is just like, oh, damn. And Prinnan's like, yeah, I've seen it a few times now, but it's still pretty awful, huh? And there, it turns out, yeah, what they're doing, because I was thinking that he was going to Sachaka, but they're like going to the borders and trying to set up some perimeter defenses. Prinnan nodded. Narvellan may have been mad, but I suspect he was correct in his belief that destroying the Sachakan's land would weaken the people. What Father fears is retribution. It would only take a few Sachaka magicians to cause havoc in Karelia. Then I will recommend we post a watcher on the Karelian side. I guess that's the best we can do, Prinnan said. He sighed, then looked over his shoulder. This whole time I've been thinking Prinnan is a girl. That's so funny. I read this and I totally thought I missed that. So it ends with Jayan thinking about back to Tessia, back to await the birth of our son, and back to the never-ending work and arguments of the Magicians' Guild. And that is the end of the book. So they succeeded. The Magicians' Guild is set up. I am wondering if the next book is going to be the one where we see the that one magician that goes bananas with using source magic that we read about. But I don't know. I'm over time, as usual, so I'm going to wrap. But thank you very much again to Ashleigh for commissioning this. Thank you, Martin, very much for being here. Martin says, "Afraid not, that book isn't written yet." I guess it doesn't need to be its own book. We pretty much get the gist. But, you know, I was sort of brainstorming. And I'll be interested to see. I'm going to get in touch with Ashleigh. Find out what she wants to do with the next episode that she has already purchased since this book is over. And I will be getting back to you guys. So stay tuned. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.